Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Resume Bootcamp, another webinar in our continuing series on career and self-improvement webinars. My name is Sharon Ryan. I'm the Assistant Director here in the William Patterson Alumni Office. Before I introduce our presenter, who has done many webinars for us previously, I'd like to go over once again how the webinar works. You're going to be able to view the presentation on your computer screen. You should see the first slide right now. You'll also be able to hear the presentation through your computer's audio system. Please feel free to ask questions. You can type them in. I've already got people typing them in, and we may wait until the end to answer them. If you'd like to have them answered in the middle, please indicate that when you type it in. We're going to monitor the questions, and we will try to get to all of them. Any questions not answered in today's webinar, we will address them after the webinar is completed, and all attendees will receive the questions and answers, along with a PDF of the presentation after the webinar is done. Also, this entire presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if there's something you want to look at or review at a later date, we will send you the link to the YouTube channel and you can see the whole presentation again. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Victoria Nada is the Associate Director for Employee Relations here at William Patterson University. Victoria has over 15 years of experience in higher education, career services, internships, and recruiting partnerships. She specializes in employer relations, networking events, building internship programs, and developing job opportunities. In today's webinar, Victoria will be showing you how to put together the perfect resume, one that will get the job or at least get your foot in the door. And now, here is Victoria Nada presenting Resume Bootcamp.
Thank you, Sharon, and everyone, welcome today. I'm glad you're spending the next hour with me or so, and hopefully I'll be able to address most of your questions and really give you an overview of how your resume should look. What I am going to talk about today is really more of a high-level overview of resumes, how to put together resumes, what should be in the resumes, rather than the specific content. So if there's any questions about content, if you could type them in and I'll address them at the end, that would be fantastic. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I'm having a little trouble with my computer here. So first thing we want to talk about is the objective of your resume. And that's really to get an interview, right? So we put resumes together for jobs that we see that we're really interested in. And that's because we want to get our foot in the door and have an opportunity to speak with somebody directly about our experiences and why we're qualified for the job that we're applying to. Once you get that resume into the pile of the recruiter, you have about a minute or less. Really, it's about 30 seconds to catch the attention of the recruiter. So you want to stick to the highlights of your achievements and your experiences. So many of you here on the call today are alumni, and you may have anywhere from, let's say, a year to 10 to 15 to 20 or plus years of experience. So we want to really talk about how to target and focus those experiences to catch the attention of a particular employer. And that's really going to come by way of putting your experiences and achievements up at the top of the resume, because that's where they're going to look first. Your resume is not an autobiography of every experience you've ever had. So you don't want to start back with the very first job you had when you were in high school. You want to focus on your more recent experiences, and you want to focus on experiences that are going to be relevant to the positions that you're applying to. So just some basics. We've already talked about the resume being a marketing tool that's used to describe what you can offer the employer. It is your first impression. They don't know who you are, what you look like, what your skills are, how qualified you are, how hard of a worker you are. Everything that an employer knows about you is going to be on that one piece of paper. So you want to tell that potential employer how you can contribute to their organization and how you can be successful and help their company be successful. Your resume should always be written with one purpose in mind, and that's to get an interview. It's not going to get you the job. It's only going to get you the foot in the door, and then it's going to be up to you to sell yourself to that employer to get yourself hired. So all resumes, regardless of whether you're first out of college or you have many years of experience, should be targeted. So you want to make sure that you're researching your industry and keeping up with current trends that are going on in the fields that you're working in. Make sure you've researched the job title for what you're applying to and know the terminology in the field and some of those buzzwords that are in your specific industry. Once you know them and you have a good handle on them, you're going to want to make sure you include those buzzwords in your cover letter and in your resume, because that's going to say to an employer, I've taken the time to research your job, to figure out what skills you're looking for, and I've included them in my resume. So an employer can basically tell whether or not you're sending a cookie cutter resume and something that you're using for all employers, or if you've actually taken the time to target your resume to the specific job you're applying to. Some of the skills that you may want to highlight include writing, analytical, research, communication, and that is in addition to the buzzwords that are in your specific industry. You want to highlight the areas that make you stand out and always include transferable skills. So if you are just a recent graduate, there might be some on the call here, and you haven't had any experiences yet, you'll want to focus on some of the transferable skills that you can take no matter where you go, like customer service, like communication or research or any project management that you might have had. And for those who have been out and working quite some time, you may be changing fields or changing job titles, so you'll want to highlight the skills that make you stand out but also will transfer to the new job in the new area that you're applying to. So this is just a list of the top 10 employability skills that our employers that we work with and ones that participate in a national survey look for within their candidates. And you're going to see that a lot of these are your soft skills. So communication, computer skills, interpersonal skills, adaptability, strong work ethic, self-confidence. These are not words that you want to put into your resume, but you want to be able to demonstrate that you are a team player or you have problem-solving skills somehow within your resume without actually using those words. So for instance, you will talk about some experiences or successes that you've had that shows you have any of these skills. Most importantly, think about your resume in terms of what you can bring to the table. So if you have any accomplishments or successes in these areas or things that an employer would find positive, that is what you're going to put onto your resume. So how do you begin and how do you actually start this process? Because again, this is all about selling yourself to an employer and selling the experiences that you have and getting your foot in the door and letting an employer know how valuable you are to their company. So think about, for experience, sit and brainstorm a little bit. Graduating seniors, if you're getting ready in the next week or so to leave William Patterson and head out into the working world, what internships might you have done? Are there any class projects that you've done that would look good on your resume? Anybody else, for seniors and everybody, do you have related work experience? Again, if you're applying to a specific position and you have related work experience, you may want to highlight that on your resume. Any industry-specific skills that you might have. So let's say you're in financial services. If you have any licenses or you have the ability to sell, how much did you sell? These are all the things that will make you stand out and make you special to an employer. If you've done any volunteer work that you'd like to highlight, maybe you were the team captain on a Relay for Life team, or you've organized a large-scale event. You may want to include that in there because it does show that you have management, project management, the ability to work within a team, those type of skills that, again, are going to be transferable. That may not be completely related to what you're applying for, but again, it's going to show that you have the ability to be a manager, to be a project manager. And then you want to reflect on those experiences. Make a list of everything that you could possibly think of that would go onto your resume. And you want to evaluate that. See which things are the most important and see which ones are the most relevant to what you're applying for. So, of course, you're going to want to include your education on there if the position you're applying to requires a degree. You want to make sure that the employer can verify that you have a degree at this point. GPA over a 3.0, if you have that, you can put it on your resume. But again, if you've been out and you've been working for many years, you don't really need to have that GPA on your resume anymore unless it's something that is required by the employer. And for folks, again, that have been working for quite some time, the education section doesn't need to be at the very top of your resume. It could be the last thing on your resume. It might be the least important. You can make a judgment call about this. I can't tell you where to put it on your resume. And I will, again, I'll give you the components of your resume, but it's up to you to actually develop it and make it your own style. Think about some of the activities or leadership opportunities that you've taken, any athletics you might have participated in, and of course, previous related experience, because you're telling an employer, I've done this job before, I was successful in it, and I will be successful moving forward. Employers take a look at what you've done because it is a reflection of what you will do in the future. So if you succeeded in a particular experience, they're going to look at that positively and say you'll succeed moving forward. For folks who don't have related experience, or maybe you're switching fields, part-time jobs and internships can also be listed. Study abroad, any educational highlights. At this level, you guys probably won't have academic projects and coursework unless you're switching fields completely and want to focus on some of the other things that you've done. Honors, research publications, we mentioned volunteer experience, and some special skills. So any computer skills you might have beyond Microsoft Office, any languages you might speak. If you're fluent in different areas, you'll want to put that on there. If you're only conversational, you'll want to make a note of that on your resume. And any lab equipment or certifications that you might have. Once you've compiled this list, you can really start to begin to develop your resume. And here are the different components that we usually see on a resume. And again, this is completely up to you how you want to set everything up. It's completely your style based on your experiences and what you want to put towards the top of your resume. Always remember that that's where an employer's eyes are going to go first, so you want to make sure you really capture them pretty quickly. Your header is always going to be at the top of your resume, and it should contain all of your contact information. So that includes your current address, your phone number, and your email address. You don't have to fully include your address. You can just include your city and your state and zip if you'd like, if you want to keep that information private. We usually recommend that you use your cell phone if that is your primary mode of communication. And make sure, of course, that your message and the voicemail that's on there is appropriate, and leave some type of signifying information for a potential employer that will call. Something that I've heard from employers is that when they call cell phones and it just repeats the phone number back to them, they're not always sure they've reached the right candidate. So if you can update it to have your name included in your voicemail, that would be the best bet for employers who are going to reach out to you. And of course, you want to make sure that your email address is appropriate and professional. You don't want something like hotdaddy@yahoo.com or something that is going to turn an employer off. If you want to continue to use your William Patterson email address, you can do so. But my recommendation, of course, would be to create a separate email address that is specific to all of your job applications. So that way, everything that's related to your job search becomes part of this one email address. You don't have to worry about your personal mixing in with your professional, and you can manage this particular account very easily, knowing that what goes in and out of that account is strictly related to your job search. Okay? Other things you could include in your header would be a URL to your LinkedIn account if you have one. You can also include a URL to maybe a portfolio site that you have where it demonstrates some of the work that you've done. Those are optional things. You don't have to have them on your resume, but know that most employers will try to find you on LinkedIn to get additional information that's not on your resume. So if you haven't created a LinkedIn account, it's something we'll talk about a little later on. Top of your resume should always include some type of objective statement or personal profile. Now, our preference is that you include a personal profile, or what we call a qualification summary, which includes about 4 or 5 bullets about who you are. So when Sharon read off my bio earlier today, she talked about my over 15 years of experience in XYZ, experience working with XYZ. Those are the types of bullet points that you want to include in your summary of qualifications, because that's what makes you stand out from another candidate. So if you're going into a sales field, include the number of years that you've been selling and what type of products you've been selling. If it's business to business, you'll talk about that. What percentages of sales have you hit? Have you exceeded things on a regular basis? You can take a look at your field where you work in the industry you're going into and think about those bullet points and what's going to make you stand out from another candidate who applies at the same time. If you opt to go with an objective statement, you'll want to make sure that it is specifically targeted to the job that you're applying to. You do not want to have a general objective, because that shows an employer you didn't go the extra step to make your resume more targeted to the job that you're applying to. So be specific or leave it off. Stick with the personal profile if you have any concern about the objective, because again, it really highlights who you are as a candidate and is going to be the eye-catching thing at the top of your resume. Education, include William Patterson, of course. If you have gotten a degree beyond William Patterson, you will also list that. But anything prior to your bachelor degree, you do not need to list. So you'll just list bachelor, master's, PhD if you have it. If there's an additional certification that you receive after getting out of William Patterson, you can include that. You don't need to include any community college or any high school on your resume. And if you're experienced, your education is not going to hold as much weight as your experiences. So again, that may fall towards the bottom. For some folks who have just recently graduated, education may be up towards the top. Your next section might be related experience or work experience, where you're going to include your most relevant experiences to date. Now, rule of thumb is you want to include your 3 most recent experiences. However, there are folks that may have been working in a field for, say, 20 plus years. In those cases, you can focus solely on the job that you've been in for that long period of time, but maybe include a progression of the job that you started with and then the additional responsibilities that were added on. So you can break that up. Let's say if you had 3 different jobs within that time period, you'll list all of those 3 jobs, the dates that you had those jobs, and the accomplishments and successes you've had within them. So it's okay if you've only had 1 job for the past 20 years, you can focus solely on that. Or you can look back and say, what are my 3 most recent experiences, and post those onto your resume. I mentioned portfolio. You can include a link to that. You could also have that as a separate piece of paper that you may be able to give to an employer if they're willing to accept it. Coursework or academic projects, again, include only if relevant. Same thing with activities, the honors. All of these things in the right-hand column are optional items that you want to include if it makes sense to do so. If you could speak another language and you're bilingual or trilingual, it's always good to put on a resume. And if you have any research or publications, put those on. And professional development, especially if it's something specifically related to your field. For instance, I belong to an organization across New Jersey that brings together all of the career centers from the state, public colleges, private, etc. I hold a vice president position within that organization, and that's something that I would want to highlight on my resume, because that will transfer to any particular position that I might apply to. So if it's relevant and it's something that you've done that goes above and beyond the call of what your job is, include it on there. Okay, you want to take the time to show off your accomplishments, and that is what your resume is about. It's reflecting on what you've done and focusing on the outcomes of what you've worked on and really portraying that to an employer. It's not enough to create job descriptions that tell me what you did in the job. It's more important to tell me what accomplishments you had within those jobs and when you can quantify that information. All of your jobs descriptions should use active verbs, so you never want to start any of your bullet points with responsibilities included or duties included, because those are passive verbs. Always start with things like managed, supervised, updated, created. Any type of action verb should be within your job description. And again, it should be targeted to address the employer's needs. So it's not enough to just list off what you might have done, but really show me, the employer, how that's going to benefit me in the long term. So it's really all in how you say it. Okay, so I've included 3 examples here of how you could potentially list your job and the description underneath, and you can see the progression that happens. Example 1 is just a listing of where I worked and the dates that I worked. It doesn't tell me what I've done. I have no job title there, and there's no description of what I did. The second example is a little bit better because it tells me that this particular candidate was in sales, but they wrote out a long paragraph. As you can see, I was responsible for cashing out customers when they bought items. I could handle customer issues when they arise. That tells me a little bit more about what you did there, but it doesn't give me a handle on really what type of successes you might have had. So take it one step further, and you can see in example number 3, it starts off using active verbs. It talks about maintaining customer service standards. So rather than just, responsible for cashing out customers, you're talking about the standards. You take it a little step further. Always remember, when you're writing your resume, it is about you, and you don't need to use the first person. So you'll see example 2 versus 3. Number 2 uses I, and number 3 does not. Because your resume is about you, you don't need to use the first person and any personal pronouns like I, me, or my anywhere throughout your resume. So some other things about your resume. Again, we're looking high level, and I will take specific questions towards the end. But just so you know, look at your resume and make sure you're looking for any types of mistakes. You always want to take a look at your resume multiple times, because you get so used to what's on the copy of your resume that you may overlook things. So spell check everything, and that means using Microsoft Word, but also rereading it, because there are times when you can miss a word or you can misrepresent a word. I was guilty of this a very long time ago, where I thought the word pursuing was on my resume, and the word was actually pursing that I had typed in. And because pursing is a real word, Microsoft didn't catch it as an error, and it took a couple of applications before I realized the mistake. So always double check, triple check, spell check, use Microsoft Word, do whatever is necessary to make sure you don't have any spelling errors. And the same goes for grammar mistakes. Make sure that you're using proper grammar and that you're not using run-on sentences. These are fragments that you're putting together, so make sure that they're reading correctly. Read it word for word, and read it backwards word for word. So what I mean by that is not read the sentence backwards, but start from the bottom of your resume and work your way to the top. Because most of us look at the resume in chronological order, we go from top to bottom. When you begin to look for mistakes, start at the very bottom, because you're going to pick up on things that you wouldn't normally, because again, you're reading it the opposite way. So use that as a great tool to always, when you're putting anything together, read it backwards, because then you're more likely to catch mistakes. Double check all your dates and names. The worst thing that you could do is guesstimate or fudge or lie or have inaccurate data on your resume. Because employers can look at your resume and verify this information, if you have lied or misrepresented yourself on your resume, they can fire you based on that. So double check all your dates, the names of the companies that you've worked with, and make sure that they are accurate. If you're not sure of them off the top of your head, go back, double check any pay stubs that you might have had, or if you have to, you can call the company that you worked for just to verify that information. Don't assume spell check's going to catch everything. And as we've said, it usually, there's one thing or one or two things that will go through. So make sure you use spell check, but then use your own spell check. Don't switch your tenses within your jobs unless there's a reason to do so. So if you have a position that you're currently working in, all of the verbs should be in the present tense. Any previous jobs, things that you've done in the past, should all be in the past. Make sure those tenses are the same, and don't switch between the two of them unless for some reason within your current role you completed a project, and that would be the only case where your tense is going to switch. So being an editor, you want to use your words wisely. Okay? Do use your language sparingly. Remember, in this case, less is more. Your resume is a snapshot of who you are. It is not an autobiography, and it should not read as an autobiography or any type of paragraph at all. You don't want to be wordy. You don't want to repeat things over and over again. So if you've had three positions, let's say, and you've done the same thing in all three positions, you don't want to continue to repeat yourself. Put it in the first one, but then include additional accomplishments and experiences in the others that will help you stand out. So repeating things, you can see on a resume when people have listed the same thing over and over again. Try not to do that. Avoid flowery language. And this just means you don't need to overstate the obvious, okay? So if you provided customer service, you don't need to say provided outstanding customer service and actively attended to customer needs in a very timely manner. You could take that and shorten it and really hone in on what you've done without all the extra language. Most employers don't want to read all about that. They want the nitty-gritty of what you've done and what your successes were. So don't use flowery language just to kind of bolster up your resume. And of course, don't state the obvious. So I see this a lot of times. People put anticipated graduation date. You just put the graduation date because it's obvious that if you put, let's say, May 2017, you haven't graduated yet. So same thing goes with a member of, or if you're in a professional organization, you just list what you're a part of. Being a designer, so you want to keep it simple. Use a very uniform format that you carry throughout your resume. One thing that I will tell you you don't want to do is use a Microsoft Word template for your resume. You want to be creative and you want to make sure your resume stands out, but by using those Microsoft templates, you are very cookie cutter, but it also gives you difficulty when you try and fix things within the resume. So keep it simple, use a uniform format, make your headings bold throughout, and use a consistent format for your dates. Some things you like to use would be bullets because those are great for listing the bullet points within your job descriptions. And be selective when you're using bold and italics and underlines. So if you've chosen to bold your company names or your educational institution names, be consistent throughout the rest of the resume. Don't bold, italicize, and underline at the same time. Pick one and go with it. One thing that I recommend is when you're putting your resume together, think about what the most important thing is on there. Is the most important thing your company name or your job title? Same thing for education. Is it the institution you went to or is it the degree you received? In these cases, it would be your job title and the degree you received. So consider bolding or italicizing those areas, not the company name or the institutional name. Pick what's important and make those stand out because, again, that's where the reader's eye is going to go. When you are going to an interview, you want to make sure you use a good printer and that nothing is going to get smeared on it. You don't have to use resume paper. You can just use regular paper. It's totally fine. Just make sure the printing is good. And you want to make sure it's in black ink. Don't change colors unless you're submitting some type of graphic design type resume. Most importantly, you don't want to confuse the reader. You don't want to make it so jazzed up with so much italics or changing of fonts and changing of sizes that then nothing stands out. Keep it uniform and make what's important stand out by using bullets or using those little bold points for those specific areas. Also, make sure your resume is balanced, and that really means filling the paper completely. So think about it in terms of when we were back in kindergarten. We'd take a blob of paint and we'd put it in the middle of the piece of paper. And then you'd fold the paper and then you'd open it up, and what was on the right-hand side of the paper matched the left-hand side of the paper, and the top matched the bottom. That's what you want your resume to look like, a complete, cohesive piece of paper that is balanced on all sides. So you want to make sure there's not too much white space in one area. And you can really achieve that by moving dates and bulleting items so that it looks balanced and that there's not too much white space anywhere. A good rule of thumb would be to use a 1-inch margin around your entire resume. Sometimes you may have one or two fragments that end up on a second page. At that point, you can adjust your margins just to get it back on one page. But you never want to go smaller than a half-size margin around, because then everything starts to look too cramped on your resume. So keep it consistent, uniform, and balanced on the page. Anything that looks like there's too many words on the page probably has too many. So you'll want to work on figuring out how to shorten some of those things on your resume. So being a writer, you want to present your information logically. You want to write like a journalist, not a poet. So use a similar pattern of words within each of your headings, and that really is the active verb choice that you're going to use. Stay consistent. Make sure that you're using active verbs. You're not using things like responsible for, and that you're keeping the pattern consistent throughout your resume. Present everything in a logical manner, and that means reverse chronological order. So what's most recent, and then work your way backwards. For those folks who might be interested in putting together a functional resume, you would be listing more of the skills as your headings, and then your job work experience would include the places you've worked for and the dates that you were there. It's a little bit of a different format, and if someone's interested in me speaking a little bit more about functional resume, just give a quick little message and I'll address that later. But really, most resumes go in reverse chronological order so that an employer can see what the most recent work you've done. When you start working with functional resumes, it's a little difficult to match up the accomplishments that you've done with the particular jobs that you've worked in. So there's a fine way of putting that all together. Most importantly, like the design, don't confuse the pattern of words. And you can see here that they don't start the same. So the first is wrote service orders, and then 5 Employee of the Month awards. Did you win them? Did you distribute them? Were you responsible for them? I'm not really sure. So you want to make sure, again, you're just being consistent and that you're avoiding the first person, because the resume is solely about you. No I, me, or my anywhere throughout your resume. Focus on your numbers. That's really important. You want to use specifics whenever you can to show your achievements, because this really tells an employer a lot more about you and what you've done than if you were just being general and vague. So on the right-hand side, you can see, don't be vague. Managed a lot of employees, raised a lot of money. I, as an employer, don't know what that means. I could look at that and say, a lot of employees, is that 100? Is that 2? Is that 20? Being able to manage 100 employees versus 2 employees is very different. And the same goes for raising a lot of money. If you were able to make $2,000 in sales versus $20,000, big difference. So be specific. So putting supervised staff of 22, that's a great way to start. You can be even more specific and tell me, were those 22 employees full-time, part-time, a combination? Just so I have a better idea of how many people and what type of people you've managed. generating $15,000 in sales. You can also go more specific and tell me what type of sales, especially if that's the particular industry you're applying to. So if it's business to business and that's the job you're currently applying to, it would be great to include that in there. If there's any type of awards that you've received, if you were Employee of the Month, be specific about how many times you were awarded that particular award. Being a salesperson, so all of us do this on a regular basis when it comes to promoting ourselves to an employer. You want to include your transferable skills and any leadership ability that you might have. Anything that's going to demonstrate additional responsibilities and promotions that you might have had within those jobs and all of your experience. Show any type of leadership experience that you might have exhibited, especially if you're applying to a management or leadership type role. Again, what you've done in the past is a great indicator of what you'll do in the future, so demonstrating those experiences are going to be key. You also want to include any work, volunteer work, or school clubs if you're a recent grad, because again, that's going to show you've done things outside of going to school and working maybe a part-time or full-time job. Also create a skill section where you're going to list your language, your computer, or any other skills that might be relevant to the position. This is not where you're going to list communication or analytical, because those are too broad, and that's that flowery language. We want to make sure we're being very targeted about skills that make you stand out. So if you know how to use SPSS, or if you're in the education field and you know how to use Smartboard, these are the things that an employer is looking for. Microsoft Office, so Word, PowerPoint, Excel, you can list them on your resume if you'd like, if you feel like you are very, very proficient in it. But many times these are 3 things that all employers expect you to have and that you usually already have, so you don't have to list them on your resume because it's kind of implied that you know how to use those particular systems. Try not to include information that isn't relevant. So if you're applying to a job in financial services, you don't want to include, let's say, any experience you did with psychology. Maybe you were a social worker before that. So there's a disconnect between what you might have done and what you're applying to. In those cases, you try and think about the transferable skills and take those and show how it would be pertinent in the job that you're applying to. You don't need to include every job that's been in your work history. Anything that's relevant is really what you want to focus on. And make sure you're tying your experience to the skills employers are looking for. So as an example, raise $2,000 for a breast cancer walk. Manage portfolio of alumni money in campus investment club. Because those are all important things that you can take with you to any job. You have the ability to raise money. You could be a fundraiser if you're applying to a fundraiser position. The ability to work with money if you're applying to accounting or finance or any field where you're going to do some type of accounts payable, receivable, accounting. That's all great to include in there. So always remember to include the relevant and things that you can take with you. Okay, so getting on top of the competition, and I believe this is the last slide, so if you have questions, feel free to start submitting them now. But most importantly, talk to other people about your experiences. Have informational interviews. Visit the Career Development Center or talk to career professionals that might be able to assist you to help develop the experiences that you've had and to highlight them the best possible way on your resume. Have other people read your resume over. So it's not enough to just look at it yourself. You want to make sure you've looked at it, that someone else has looked at it. Maybe you send it to me here in the Career Development Center and I take a look at it. The more eyes, the better it's going to be, because somebody is going to say, hey, have you thought about this? Or, hey, you're missing this. And those are things that will be pointed out to you that you can then take and revise moving forward. Always remember that you're going to get a lot of different opinions on your resume. And it doesn't mean that my opinion is better than another person's opinion or that your opinion doesn't matter. You want to take all of that feedback, all of the critiques that you've received, and make the best possible representation on your resume that you can. So taking all of those different critiques and changing things and tweaking it to how you want your resume to look like, ultimately you're the decider on what that resume will look like when it goes out to an organization. If you submit it here to our office, we will critique it for you. We will give you feedback, and we will approve it for you, regardless of what we think, the format should look like. As long as you're comfortable with it and you're comfortable with the employers reading it as is, that's what's most important. We also encourage you to join professional associations in your field if it is relevant and it makes sense, because it gives you an opportunity, one, to join the executive board or the leadership positions, and you can take on an additional role outside of what your everyday work experiences are. It also gives you an opportunity to meet people in your field that could potentially serve as a future network for you. And that's where LinkedIn is going to come key. As you meet people you work with, as you build that network of industry professionals that you've connected with, LinkedIn is a really great way to stay connected to those people. If you haven't done so already, I would recommend joining LinkedIn so that you can begin to create your online resume and your online presence. It's another layer and it's another tool in your kit, your marketing kit, that's going to sell you to an employer. Every employer, every recruiter that I've ever talked to will get a resume and then go on to LinkedIn to take a look and see if there's anything additional on that profile that will give them a better sense of what the candidate is like. It gives you a chance to talk about your skills, but it also gives you an opportunity to post some of your presentations or some of your work, things that you have done that you wouldn't be able to put into your resume. I could then go on as a recruiter and take a look at some of the reports that you've put together. Or if you're working in design, I can see some of the pieces that you've put together. It's an additional layer to that paper resume, and it's something that an employer will probably look at before they even call you in for an interview. So think about doing LinkedIn and improving that so that way your online presence really is very, very strong in addition to what's on your resume. Use your former supervisors and professors as resources for putting your resume together. It's not enough just to have your friend look at it, but have somebody who is in your industry look at it that would know what the buzzwords are that need to be there. And look at the job description for the position you're applying to. Pick out some key things within that job and make sure that they're on your resume. A lot of recruiters use automatic tracking systems that will scan your resume for specific keywords. For example, if you're applying to a marketing specialist position, it might be pulling out words like marketing or product development or branding. And if those words are not within your resume, you might not get pulled out to be reviewed further. A lot of times your first resume pass is going to be by a bot. Somebody, it's not a physical person, but somebody who has put keywords in, and then the program will scan the resumes. You don't want to get yourself knocked out before you even get your foot in the door if you don't have those words on there. So make sure you're looking at that job description and you're using that within the resume itself. And finally, we talk about using Trailblazer. Trailblazer is our online job posting system here at the university. It's specific to William Patterson, and only current students and alumni are eligible to use it. If you don't have an account yet, you can request one. You would just go to our website, which will be on the next slide, and click on the Trailblazer link and request an alumni account. If you are a recent grad or you're getting ready to graduate this semester, you do have an account that will be transferred over to an alumni account. This is where we post all positions. So for anybody looking for entry-level or experienced positions, we have vetted what goes into the system. We make sure the companies are legit companies. Occasionally one or two will slip by, but we do our best to make sure that every job posting that's in the system has been reviewed by somebody here in the office. We find that most students and alumni tend to get more interviews through the Trailblazer system because these are employers that have specifically called our office in order to post their positions. So they're more likely to give you a call. It's just one of the many tools that you have available to you through our office. There's other websites that we can refer you to be more specific. So I mentioned our website. This is the contact information for our office. That is our website, and the Trailblazer information can be found there. And that is my contact information. So that is my direct line. It'll come directly to my office. You will not get the front desk. And that is my email address. I am more than happy to take a look at anybody's resume. If you would like to email it to me, just include some specific information if there's something you'd like me to take a look at, or if there's something you're working on or you're not really sure about. I try my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. And since it is approaching the holidays, it is a little slower. So I do have a bit more time to work on these. So I'd be more than happy to do so. But that really brings me to the end of the presentation. Again, it was really high level. So if you have specific questions, I'll be more than happy to take them. So Sharon, I think you have access to the questions. So I will let you let me know what they are.
I do have access, and I do have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
I have to tell you, though, you've answered quite a few of them.
Okay.
One of the very first that came in was, how do I fill up my resume when I have limited experience? And I think you really answered that in the first part of it, putting volunteer work and things like that.
Yep,
So.
absolutely. Yep. Volunteer work, any type of academic projects, anything that will really highlight some of the other skills that you have, that really helps to fill things up.
Okay. This next question is a little more specific. Vicki, I'm not sure. I'm not remembering if you do a lot of the science and health or not. I'm not sure, but this is kind of related to that. This person is a recent pharmacy grad looking for a retail pharmacist position. Two questions. When does this person send the employer a CV versus a resume?
Okay, it depends on the position that you're applying to. If they specifically ask for a resume, then you would send your abbreviated resume. But if they're asking for the CV, you can send that. If it's not specific, err on the side of sending more information just because of the specific field that you're in. If they're not specific as to which one they want, send the CV.
Thank you. And she had another question. Should she include the names of the rotation preceptors on the CV? And I'm not sure if you work with the science and health, but.
So I wouldn't include any like contact information for specific people, but that might be something. What if this particular person's still on the line? What you can do is send me a copy of that resume with that specific question, just so I can take a look at the way that it's formatted and let you know if it's appropriate or not. I think that would probably be the best way to address that one.
Okay, thank you. If not, I'll send a message. Okay, next question. This person has always asked why they left a job. Should you include reason for leaving at the end of your job on a resume?
No, you don't need to do that. Most times the natural progression of a job is, you're either leaving for a role that's going to take on more leadership, or maybe you're switching fields or different organizations. You don't have to include that on your resume, but be prepared to talk about it in a job interview if that should come up. And most importantly, you always want to be honest and upfront about why you left a position. Again, most times it's because you were taking another career move. And if it's true or not, like a lot of us will leave jobs because of managers or because of work environment. You don't focus on that. You can talk about the opportunities that are new to you or of new and interesting to you at the position that you move into. So always focus on the positive aspects of it rather than the negative. But you don't have to physically list it on your resume.
Okay. Another question is, I think you also touched on this. This person's been told not to go back more than 15 years, but others say you can go back to the beginning to show progression in your career. And this particular person has over 40 years of experience, so how far should they go back?
Okay. So I think it really depends on the field that you're in. So, for example, for me, right, I work in career development, and most of the time we submit CVs that do go back to the beginning of where we started our careers because they do want to see that progression. However, if you're in business or accounting or psychology, they're not going to need to see that detailed progression of where you started to where you ended up. So it is kind of industry specific. And there's very few industries that really want to see your entire work history. So in that case, you really will include the most recent, so 15 years, 20 years. I wouldn't go much further back than that unless you're in a specific field that really needs you to show that progression of work experience.
Okay. There's lots of questions.
Okay.
Okay, so if someone wanted to know what's the difference between a CV and a resume.
Okay, so easiest way to tell you is a resume is one page and a CV is more than one page. And your resume is a quick snapshot of what you've done and your recent experiences. Your CV is a curriculum vitae, and that is really most of the time it's used in the education field, science field, and it talks about almost every experience you've had to date, any research that you've done, publications that you've done, any presentations. It turns into multiple pages. I've seen CVs that end up 10 pages long because people have done extensive research experience. So the difference between the two is one is really extensive versus one being really quick. And again, it's very industry specific. You're not going to submit a CV to a business position, and you're probably not going to submit a resume to a, dean of students type position at an institution. So they're very different and they're very specific to the fields that you go in.
Thanks. I think you might have touched on this one a little too. Can you truly reinvent yourself? How do you do that on your resume if you're interested in a job not related to your prior career experience?
Absolutely. You can reinvent yourself without lying, of course. But I've had plenty of alumni that have come back and said, I was working in this field and I don't want to do this anymore. I want to go into another field. A perfect example is somebody that I had recently that was a history major that wanted to go into social media and marketing. Vastly different areas, and the experiences that she had were vastly different than what she was applying to. So we really took a look at what she had done within her previous experiences and pulled out some areas that would make sense to reinvent it into a social media resume. You could take a look to, for with that example, what are things that you're doing within the area that you're interested in now, and focus on those. That's where your volunteer work is going to come into play. If you're doing something online, if you're interested in social media, those are all things that you can play on to retool your resume and gear it more towards what you're going to be applying to. It's in those cases where you do want to make a drastic career change that's good to get a career professional's input to help you retool your resume. So if that's something you want to work on, that would be a case where you would email me directly and let me know specifically what you're applying to so I can help you retool that. But it does happen.
This seems to be a really popular question because there's another one who basically said the same thing, has 10 plus years of experience and an outdated degree in a different field from the job they're seeking. So it's the same thing, right? Pull what you did in your job, what skills you had, and apply it to the new job that you're seeking.
Yeah, absolutely. And in those cases when you want to make a big switch, you want to go and join a professional organization or join a network, something that's going to be in the field that you're now going to apply to, because those are the people that are going to be able to help you to put things on your resume and really teach you and refocus you on how to pull out some of those things that employers are going to want to see. So you have to go the extra step further when you're switching fields to get involved in areas that are pertinent to that industry, whether it's through professional organizations or groups within LinkedIn. You can then take those and list it on your resume. So there's a lot of different ways that you can retool and switch things up.
Okay, here's a question about someone applying for a teaching position. What do you put under LinkedIn under presentation if you're applying for a teaching position?
So it depends on what type of teaching position you're applying to. Some things I have seen, or maybe some of how you develop your curriculum or you put together your lesson plans. Some of those lesson plans you can put on there. If you've done presentations within those classrooms, again, it's going to vary. So like somebody who's going and applying for a K through 5 presentation is going to be very different from somebody who might be applying to a high school or college position. So it's going to be specific to those areas, and think of it in terms of where am I applying and what might they want to see. A lot of times people will put their lesson plans up there, and how they've developed it, or any rubrics that they might have that they use to grade. Those things can all go up there.
Okay. The next question is about when someone calls to verify your employment. Are they the person they're calling? Do they just verify it, or are they allowed to say the reason you were let go?
Okay, so anything that you list on your resume can be verified. And what that means, there's only two things that an employer can verify when they make that phone call to somebody that's on your resume. And that is to verify that you indeed worked there at that company at that job title and what the dates are on your resume. They cannot ask anything beyond those two questions. So they can't say, did he leave on good terms? Did she get fired? Did she resign? The only two questions are regarding the company job and the job title and the dates. The only time they can ask additional questions are to the people that you have provided as references. And those are all people, probably, that you have asked in advance that are going to say good things about you. So those are the only people that like an HR person or somebody verifying can ask additional questions for.
Okay. Again, another person who was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years. How do you make up for time? And I think it's the same as someone doing a job change, right? Would that be the same?
Absolutely. And chances are, I see a lot of stay-at-home moms, stay-at-home dads that get involved in organizations and projects within their children's schools. So if if you're involved in the PTA, or maybe you did something out of your church organization, or you took the lead on yearbook, whatever it is, those are things that you can put on your resume to demonstrate that you've done things while you were out of work full time, that you still kept yourself crisp and fresh, and you have skills that you can then translate. It's not a detrimental thing to have been out of work for X number of years. When you're ready to come back, you just put on your cover letter why you're looking to come back, and an employer will look at that and just see what you've done during the meantime. Most employers will say, oh, looks like someone was a stay-at-home mom or a caretaker or something, so it's not a negative thing.
Okay, we have a few more minutes, just a few more questions. I literally want to answer this next one. Can you have two resumes that would be tailored to different fields? I would say you can have as many resumes, and you should have as many resumes as tailored to each position you're applying for, right?
Yes, I don't even have to answer that question because you did, and you really, if you only have one version of your resume, you don't have enough. So you should have your basic resume that you then tailor every time to the position you're going to apply to.
Perfect. Okay, just a few more here. How many bullets are appropriate when you're describing your particular job function? You saw the bullets on the resumes.
Yeah, so if you have, let's say you're doing 3 most recent jobs, you'll want to include bullet points, about, I would say, 4 or 5 bullet points within each of those job descriptions. But if you've been in a position for a long time, you're going to have a lot more bullet points within those. So good rule of thumb is just about 4 to 5 within each job description, or until your resume is full.
Thank you. And then this question is somebody who's been 20 years at a job, let's say, and they worked side jobs. I'm thinking they did maybe consulting or something, and they were not exactly sure. Like maybe they consulted for a firm for a year, but they're not exactly sure. Was it 2015 to 2016? Was it 2009 to 2010? Would you put those second jobs down? And also, if you're not sure of the dates, how would you do that? Because you don't want to lie.
Right. So if you've been consistently in a job for a long time and there's no job gaps or anything, you could just focus solely on that, unless the consulting work or the side job really makes or breaks you when you're applying to a position. So if it's something that is going to make you stand out because the position you're applying to is directly related to the consulting work you did, then you're going to want to put that on there. And again, you want to make sure that your dates are accurate. So if you have to call the company to get accurate information, you're going to want to do that because, again, you don't want to be willy-nilly about the dates because those are all verifiable things. So if you really have no way of verifying those, I would recommend you don't include that specifically on your resume, but take some of the skills or the important accomplishments that you've had within that consulting or part-time job and put it up into the qualifications summary. That will solve the problem of the dates and do I put it, do I not put it? Take the most important things and throw them up into the summary.
Okay. You know what? There might be a few more, but I know it's 1 o'clock and I know a lot of people are having to leave. So I want to thank you all for coming. Victoria, everyone's saying thank you. So thank you for doing this presentation.
Not a problem. Feel free to email me if you guys have specific questions that I did not answer.
And some people I did send a little private message to, send your resume to Victoria. She'll be happy to help you. So thank you, Victoria, and thank you all for attending. And we will be sending you the link to this webinar as well as a PDF this afternoon, so you can look at anything you may have missed. So thank you again, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thanks all for attending. Bye.
Bye-bye.